suspicious of her grandchildren's intentions, as they only visit her seeking benefits. A grandmother decides to pretend she has lost her memory to see their reactions, and what she discovers is truly surprising. Widowed for many years, Margaret had always been the matriarch of the family, dedicating her life to raising her children, Ryan and Michelle, after losing her husband. From a very young age, she learned to deal with the difficulties of being responsible for two small children in a world full of uncertainties. Ryan, the eldest, built his own family and had two children, Jacob and Lisa, teenagers who often visited their grandmother. Michelle, the youngest, raised her only son, Justin, the same age as Jacob. Margaret always maintained close ties with her grandchildren and loved the joy they brought into her life. When they were children, she spent afternoons telling stories or preparing meals they loved, gestures that strengthened a special connection with each of them. However, as the grandchildren grew older, Margaret began to notice changes in the visits, which now seemed motivated more by gifts or favors than by the genuine desire to spend time with her. This left her worried and suspicious that the affection she received was not as sincere as it seemed. Over time, Margaret couldn't avoid the thoughts that troubled her about her grandchildren's behavior. The emptiness she felt during some visits was almost palpable. The sense that interactions had become less affectionate and more conditioned by requests and interests became more evident each day. The smiles seemed forced, and the conversations were filled with casual comments about objects or stories that hinted at a subtle yet unmistakable interest in the possessions Margaret had. One afternoon, while observing the old china cabinet where she kept family mementos, she recalled a recent episode. Jacob, Ryan's eldest son, had shown an exaggerated curiosity about the emerald earrings she always wore at important events. "Grandma, these earrings are beautiful. Have you ever thought about passing them down to Lisa or me?" Jacob asked with a smile that didn't convince Margaret. She tried to smile, steering the conversation elsewhere. "I haven't thought about it, dear. They're just mementos from the past. They don't really hold much value." Meanwhile, Justin, Michelle's son, was less subtle. During a quick visit, while absent-mindedly scrolling through his phone, he commented indifferently, "I heard you own some land by the road. They say it's worth a fortune now." Margaret disguised the pain she felt hearing those words and simply replied, "Oh dear, those things don't matter now. I'm more concerned about your lives." These moments accumulated in Margaret's mind, creating an unease that she didn't know how to resolve. On the other hand, Lisa was a constant and affectionate presence. The young girl, with her calm demeanor, was always ready to help her grandmother with daily tasks. One Sunday, while Lisa was tending to the garden with Margaret, their conversation seemed full of lightness, something rare lately. "Grandma, these flowers need more water, don't you think? The summer's been so hot," Lisa said while watering the hibiscus plants. "You're right, my dear. I think I'm not taking care of them like I used to." "Thank you for always noticing these details," Margaret replied, her eyes shining with gratitude. Lisa's visits were a small light amidst the loneliness Margaret was beginning to feel. Still, her mind continued to question the intentions of her other grandchildren. Even Ryan and Michelle seemed distant, caught up in their busy routines. It was during one particularly lonely afternoon that Margaret decided to visit Jason, her doctor and longtime friend, for a routine checkup. But deep down, Margaret had another goal in mind. At the doctor's office, Jason, a man in his middle years with a perpetually kind demeanor, greeted her with a warm smile. "Margaret, it's always good to see you, but I hope everything's okay." "Ah, Jason," Margaret began, sitting down with a sigh. "Physically, I'm fine. It's my mind that's been full of things lately." Jason leaned forward slightly, concerned. "What's going on? Are you feeling sad?" Margaret hesitated before continuing. "I've been thinking a lot about my grandchildren. You know, Jason, I feel like something has changed. They visit me, but it's different. I don't know. It doesn't feel as sincere anymore. Jason frowned, clearly trying to understand what Margaret was feeling. Changes in families are normal, Margaret. Young people get busy with life, but that doesn't mean they don't love you. Maybe, Margaret said, looking down at the floor. But I have the feeling that their affection depends on something, like I'm more useful to them as the rich grandmother than as a person. The doctor was silent for a moment. That's serious, Margaret. What do you want to do about it? Margaret raised her gaze and took a deep breath. I've been thinking of an idea, but it might be absurd. I want to pretend I'm sick, maybe even have memory loss. I want to see who really cares about me. Jason's eyes widened, and he leaned back in his chair. Margaret, that's dangerous. Lying about something like that can cause serious problems. I know, Jason, Margaret replied firmly, but it's the only way I'll know their true intentions. Please, you're the only person I trust to help me with this. The doctor shook his head, clearly uncomfortable. I can't encourage something like that. What if they find out? It could hurt your relationship with them even more. But Jason, Margaret insisted, her voice slightly trembling, I need to know who's truly by my side. If it's necessary, I'll accept the consequences. Jason sighed deeply. I really don't like this, Margaret, but I'll think about how I can help. Just promise me you'll be very careful with it. Margaret nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. Thank you, Jason. I won't do anything that puts anyone at risk, I promise. In the days following the consultation, Margaret reflected on her conversation with Jason. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, especially the worried tone he had used when trying to dissuade her. Although he had promised to think about how he could help, Margaret knew she would need time for Jason to come around to the idea. Meanwhile, she tried to observe her grandchildren and reflect on what led her to consider such an extreme measure. During a peaceful afternoon, while organizing old photo albums, Margaret remembered precious moments from her life with her grandchildren. The nostalgia made her question how everything had come to this point. It was then that the phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Ryan. "Mom, how are you?" he asked, his voice hurried. "I'm fine, son." "And you?" Margaret replied with a contained smile. "Running around as usual. Listen, Jacob and Lisa should be by tomorrow. I tried to convince them to bring you some fruit, but you know how teenagers are." Margaret felt a pang of sadness at his casual comment. "Don't worry, Ryan. Just the fact that they're visiting is something good." The call ended quickly, as usual. Although Ryan was thoughtful in calling, Margaret felt his words were more of a polite obligation than a genuine expression of affection. The next day, as Ryan had said, Jacob and Lisa arrived together. While Lisa ran to hug her grandmother, Jacob seemed distracted, fiddling with his phone. "Grandma, it's so good to see you," Lisa said, planting a warm kiss on her grandmother's cheek. "Looks like you brought enough energy for both of you," Margaret joked, looking at Jacob, who merely glanced up to greet her. "Hi, Grandma," he said with a quick smile before returning to his phone screen. Margaret watched her two grandchildren carefully. Lisa, as always, helped her grandmother organize little things around the house, while Jacob seemed bored, dragging himself through the living room without engaging in conversations. After a while, Jacob stood up and announced he had to leave. "I have to meet some friends, Grandma. I'll see you another time," he said, before quickly saying goodbye. After Jacob left, Margaret and Lisa stayed in the kitchen, chatting while preparing coffee. Lisa eagerly spoke about a school project, while Margaret listened, enchanted by her granddaughter's liveliness. In a moment of pause, Margaret took Lisa's hand and said, "You're a special girl, Lisa. Never stop being this way, so attentive to others." "Oh, Grandma, I just want to help you." "You've done so much for us," Lisa replied, smiling. These interactions reinforced the contrast between her grandchildren, but Margaret still couldn't shake off Jason's words. For days, she hesitated to do anything, weighing the risks and consequences of her plan. It was then that, on a sunny morning while tending to the garden, the phone rang again. It was Jason. "Margaret, I've been thinking a lot about what you asked me," he said, without preamble. "I need to tell you that I still think this is a terrible idea." "Jason, I've already told you it's not out of malice," Margaret insisted. "I just want to understand who's really by my side. You know how difficult these last few years have been for me, and I feel like I'm losing something important with my family." On the other end of the line, Jason sighed. "I understand what you want, Margaret, but don't you think this could spiral out of control? Lying about an illness, especially something serious like memory loss, could cause severe emotional damage, not just to them, but to you too." "I've thought about it," Margaret replied, her voice firm, "but if I don't do anything, I'll keep living with this doubt. Do you think it's easy for me to realize that maybe only Lisa really cares about me? I want to protect the little dignity I have left." There was a moment of silence, and Margaret felt Jason's hesitation. "You're right to want answers, but, Margaret, you promise that if I agree to help, you'll be careful. No exaggerations or actions that could harm your health." "I promise," Margaret said immediately, a mixture of relief and determination in her voice. "I just need something small that makes it all more believable. I won't do anything that causes serious problems, Jason." "Okay," he replied, still reluctant. "I'll prepare a basic medical report, something saying you're showing mild signs of confusion. But remember, Margaret, this has to be a very carefully staged act. Don't push anything. I'll have the document ready for you to pick up next week." "Thank you, Jason. You don't know how much this means to me," Margaret said, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. After the call, she stayed in the garden, contemplating the flowers that Lisa had helped her tend 2 days earlier. Now, with Jason's help secured, Margaret knew the time to start her act was near, but she wanted to do everything gradually so as not to raise any suspicion. The following week, Margaret picked up the document at Jason's office. He handed it to her with a concerned look, but didn't say anything except a brief warning. "Take care, Margaret, and don't let this go too far." She nodded, carefully tucking the paper into her bag. Over the following days, Margaret began to show small signs of confusion. At first, they were simple things, like forgetting where she had left her glasses or confusing the names of her grandchildren in quick conversations. "Grandma, you just called Justin Jacob a while ago," Lisa said, laughing, while helping Margaret set the dinner table. "Oh, my mind's a mess lately," Margaret replied with a calm smile. "Age doesn't forgive, does it?" Lisa didn't think much of it, assuming it was just something natural. However, the reactions of the other grandchildren were quite different. During a brief visit from Jacob, Margaret purposely asked if he had liked a book she had actually lent to Lisa. "It wasn't me you lent this book to, Grandma. I think you're confusing it," Jacob replied, not hiding his impatience. "You've been pretty distracted lately, huh?" "Maybe," Margaret said, looking at him intently, while he quickly averted his gaze. Justin, for his part, seemed even more disconnected. During a quick visit, while Margaret pretended to search for a pen she forgot, he responded impatiently, "Grandma, it must be somewhere around. Don't you get tired of losing things?" "Maybe it's my age, Justin," Margaret answered calmly, noticing his indifference as he went back to fiddling with his phone. These small interactions only confirmed what Margaret had already feared. Jacob and Justin's attention seemed more limited to what they could gain from the situation. On the other hand, Lisa continued to show genuine affection. During one visit, when Margaret mentioned she was feeling forgotten, Lisa took her hand and said, "Grandma, don't worry. If you need help with anything, I'm here. I'll always be." These words filled Margaret's heart with gratitude, but also strengthened her resolve. She needed to continue with the plan, even though it was difficult. Gradually, her act would become more complex, always carefully observing the reactions of her family. Weeks passed, and Margaret continued with her act, more determined than ever to carry it through to the end. With the medical report from Jason in hand, she finally presented the document to the family, asking Ryan and Michelle to come to her house for a conversation. "Mom, are you okay? You seem so serious," Ryan said, sitting on the sofa with a worried look. "Well, kids," Margaret began, adjusting herself in the chair. "I went to the doctor recently, and he ran some tests. It seems like my memory's starting to fail. It's nothing serious yet, but he recommended that I avoid stress and have more company around me." Michelle's eyes widened, clearly shocked. "Are you saying—" "It's serious, Mom. What exactly did the doctor say?" Margaret handed over the report for them to read. While Ryan skimmed through the pages, Michelle began to cry. "I can't believe this is happening to you. What can we do to help?" Ryan, on the other hand, seemed more practical. "Mom, you need constant care. Don't you think we should consider hiring a nurse? That way you wouldn't be alone." Margaret smiled, hiding the sadness behind her act. "Let's see how things progress. For now, I just need you all nearby, along with the grandchildren." The children agreed to help her, but Margaret knew the real test was yet to come. The grandchildren. Over the next weeks, she intensified her performance, forgetting small tasks like where she left her keys, mixing up names, and even pretending to have trouble remembering recent conversations. Jacob and Justin initially showed some concern, but this quickly turned into irritation. "Grandma, again you forgot where you put the TV remote?" Jacob said during a visit, sighing impatiently. "I've looked everywhere. I don't know how you manage to lose things like this." "I'm not doing it on purpose, dear," Margaret replied, lowering her gaze to hide her disappointment. "My mind isn't the same anymore." "Maybe you should write things down," Justin suggested without looking up from his phone. "Or use those reminder apps on your phone." "Oh, wait, you probably don't even know how to use your phone properly, huh?" These words pierced Margaret inside, but she kept going with the plan. On the other hand, Lisa continued to be the only one who visited regularly, helped with tasks, and showed true interest in her well-being. One afternoon, while helping her grandmother tidy up the room, the young girl noticed that Margaret looked more exhausted. "Grandma, you look tired today. Do you want to rest while I finish tidying everything up?" Lisa asked, gently holding her grandmother's arm. "Thank you, my dear. You always know how to calm me down," Margaret replied, touching Lisa's face with affection. "I know I can count on you." Lisa smiled, feeling grateful for being able to help. Margaret, however, carefully observed each gesture and word from her granddaughter, realizing that her affection was genuine, in contrast to the indifference from the others. As time went on, the situation became clearer. Jacob and Justin appeared less and less, and when they did, their conversations were quick and impersonal. They seemed more interested in asking about their grandmother's belongings than in knowing how she was doing. "Grandma, I heard Dad talking about your house. Have you thought about what you'll do with it in the future?" Jacob asked during a short visit. Margaret sighed, pretending not to understand. "Future? I don't know. I'm still thinking about the present, dear." "Well, I just hope everything gets sorted out fairly," Jacob said, in a tone that Margaret knew was insincere. Meanwhile, Lisa kept being the only one visiting frequently, helping with tasks, and showing real care for her grandmother. One afternoon, while they were baking a cake together, Margaret couldn't hold back her emotions. "You know, Lisa, you're my greatest joy, don't you?" Margaret said, holding her granddaughter's hand. "Oh, Grandma, I just want you to be well. You're so important to me," Lisa replied with a smile that made Margaret's eyes sparkle. Finally, Margaret realized it was time to reveal the truth. She called a family meeting for a Sunday, insisting that everyone be present. When they all arrived, she was sitting in the living room, holding the medical report. "I want to thank you all for being here today," Margaret began, her voice firm. "I have something important to say, and I hope you all listen to me until the end. The grandchildren, children, and even Jason, whom Margaret had invited as a witness, were present. The tension was palpable. Margaret took a deep breath before continuing. In the past few months, you've seen that my memory seemed to be failing. Many of you were concerned, but others showed something different, something that hurt me deeply. I want to say today that all of this was a lie. The room fell into complete silence. Michelle was the first to react. A lie? Mom, what do you mean you pretended to be sick? Yes, Michelle, Margaret said, looking at each person in the room. I did this to understand who truly cared about me, not for what I have, but for who I am. Jacob abruptly stood up. This is absurd. You lied to all of us? How do you expect us to trust you now? Don't talk about trust, Jacob, Margaret replied sternly. I saw how you and Justin pulled away. You only came around when you thought you could gain something from it. I saw the impatience in your eyes, the indifference in your words. Justin tried to justify himself. Grandma, that's not true. I was busy, but I always cared about you. Caring means being present, Justin, Margaret said, tears in her eyes. And the only one who did that was Lisa. Everyone turned to look at Lisa, who was visibly emotional. Grandma, I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just did what any granddaughter would do. Margaret held Lisa's hand firmly and looked around the room, her gaze intense on every face. Don't say that, my granddaughter. What you did was much more than what any granddaughter would do. You stayed by my side when I needed you most, not because you wanted something in return, but because you truly cared for me. Jacob scoffed, crossing his arms. This isn't fair, Grandma. Just because she came by more doesn't mean we didn't care. Yes, Mom, Ryan agreed, visibly uncomfortable. You're being too harsh. Jacob and Justin have their lives, responsibilities. It doesn't mean they love you any less. Margaret raised an eyebrow and took a deep breath before releasing Lisa's hand and standing slowly. Ryan, I expected more from you. You're my son, and you should know that love isn't measured by quick visits or half-hearted excuses. You were so busy justifying Jacob's absences and your own that you forgot to see my loneliness. Mom, this is unfair, Michelle intervened. You're blaming us, but we also have our struggles. Justin was studying, trying to build his future. Margaret turned to Michelle, her expression hardening. Struggles, Michelle? Do you think I didn't have struggles? I raised both of you on my own, sacrificing everything for you to have a better life. Was it too much to ask for a little company? Justin came around, but he was always distracted, as if my presence was an inconvenience. Is that what you call caring? Grandma, that's not true, Justin said, standing up in protest. I always cared about you. I just wasn't good at showing it. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. Love without actions, Justin, is empty, Margaret said, sadness in her voice. I heard your words, felt your impatience, saw how you treated me like just an old, stubborn woman who forgets things. You and Jacob only came back when you were worried about what you could gain in the future. Jacob, offended, raised his voice. That's a very serious accusation, Grandma. We're your family. You can't just exclude us like this. Margaret then raised her hand, signaling for silence. Serious is seeing my own family treat me like an object, Jacob. Serious is realizing that for you, I was no more than a source of benefits. You pulled away, and when you returned, it was with ulterior motives. But I saw everything. I heard everything. I may forgive, but I can't ignore. Lisa was the only one who truly stayed by my side. The room remained silent, except for Michelle's sobs. Jason, sitting in the back, watched everything with a mixture of relief and concern, while Lisa held her grandmother's hand more firmly. That's why, Margaret continued, her voice strong and clear, I've decided to leave my inheritance entirely to Lisa, and this decision is not open for discussion. Protests began immediately. Jacob and Justin spoke at once, arguing that it wasn't fair and that everyone should have a share of the inheritance. Michelle cried and tried to appeal to Margaret's compassion. "Mom, you can't do this. It will tear our family apart. Don't you think you're going too far?" "Too far?" Margaret said firmly. "Too far was what you did to me, leaving me alone while I pretended to be vulnerable, testing you because I saw no other way out. Lisa, even without knowing anything, was the only one who showed me what true love is. If this destroys our family, Michelle, maybe it's because it was already broken before." Ryan tried to argue. "Mom, this is going to cause a rift. Think about it. I know Jacob and Justin messed up, but they're young. They can change." "Then let them change," Margaret replied with determination. "But not at my expense. What I'm doing now is a lesson, not a punishment. You all need to learn to appreciate people while they're still around, not just for what they can offer." Lisa, tears in her eyes, tried to intervene. "Grandma, I don't want this to hurt our family. I didn't do anything expecting to get something in return. I just wanted you to be well." Margaret smiled at Lisa and caressed her face. "I know, my dear. That's exactly why you deserve everything. You've shown me that there's still goodness, there's still true love. This inheritance is the least I can do to thank you." The tension in the room was palpable. Jacob and Justin still protested, but Jason stood up, intervened, and spoke firmly. "Margaret has the right to do whatever she wants with her assets. And after everything she's been through, maybe you all need to reflect more on what really matters in this family." Those words, spoken by an outsider, silenced the protests. Margaret sighed deeply and in a calmer voice concluded, "I love you all, but love without reciprocity is a burden. Lisa will not only receive my inheritance, she will receive something much more valuable, my gratitude and my respect. And I hope this serves as an example for everyone." The meeting ended in tense silence. Jacob and Justin left resentful, while Michelle and Ryan remained silent, visibly shaken. Lisa, however, stayed by her grandmother's side until the end of the day, helping her organize the house and consoling her after the difficult revelation. In the end, as Margaret watched Lisa with eyes full of tenderness, she knew she had made the right decision. With that, as her other grandchildren dealt with the consequences of their neglect, Lisa not only received the inheritance, but also strengthened a bond with her grandmother that time could never erase. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.